For the second installment of this year's ILC mini video series, I sat down with one of our assistant professors in our political science department, Dr. Andrea Silva. She received a bachelor's in political science from Loyola Marymount University, and then she went on to get a master's in government and politics from Illinois State University, and after that she earned a PhD in American politics and racial and ethnic politics from the University of California, Riverside. I sat down and talked to her about race, colorism, and nationality and how it plays a part in today's society.
What does it mean to say that race is a social construct? Okay, so when we talk about, most of the things in our society are created by humans, right? So when we talk about things being socially constructed, it's just a fancy word for saying like we made it up. Right? We decided that it was going to be a thing. We decided that it was going to be important, and we have created institutions and actions that revolve around how important we've made that, right? So like, I don't know, what are kids doing today that's really cool? I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
What are kids doing today?
I don't know. You tell me. So like, everybody really loves, everybody really loves Game of Thrones, right? So their popularity also is socially constructed, right? So like we as a society decided that that's something that's interesting and good, right? We decided that it's gonna have like a real importance in our day-to-day discussions, right? And we also decided that that's something that everybody should at least know about, right? So when you meet somebody and they don't know, or they don't watch, or they don't even know what's happening on that television show, you're like, what's wrong with you, right? That's socially constructed, right? We've decided that this particular television show is going to be important, wonderful, and vibrant, right? Same thing with race as a social construct, right? We've decided that this arbitrary thing that we made up called race, right, that is not real, is going to be important, right, and central to our society. We've literally made it up.
What is the definition of racism?
Great. So there's a lot of definitions of racism. A lot of people have an they have their own identification of what racism is. Like me personally, I think it's a system of advantages based on race with institutional structures and policies and practices that sustain the advantage of some people over others, right? So we live in a world, and we live in a time, right, where we live in a white supremacist system, right? Not to say that everybody's like a Nazi. That's not what that means, right? But we privilege Western and white culture, institutions, language, right, over other cultures. That in and of itself isn't necessarily wrong or bad, right? It's when you start adding advantages and disadvantages based on this social construction, right? Based on this thing that we made up called race, right? And that's what racism is, right? It's giving particular advantages to some folks over others, and those advantages have the weight and the support of government structures. Oops. So in our case, right, there's a relative advantage for white people that are like white presenting, right? That doesn't mean that you have to be a white person, right? So Latinos can also be very racist, right? We assume that racism is like one evil person that's like, oh, I hate all those Mexicans, right? That's like gonna go out and like be racist to people and call them racist names. But that's not really that's how racism works in some places, and it's definitely how it used to work in the United States. But there's structural racism, right? the way that the system is set up, it's set up to advantage certain people over others, right? When we're talking about race. There's institutional racism. There's racism that that kind of racism supports a particular type of knowledge, a particular type of action, a particular type of language, right? There's unconscious racism, right? The racism that we've kind of been led to believe through our culture that is something that, like, straight hair is beautiful, or that white skin is beautiful, right? Those are kind of unconscious things, right? It's very rarely that we actually encounter a person that is actively racist, right? So what we're really talking about here is not people, but structures and institutions that perpetuate the privileging of one type of knowledge, one type of look, one type of language, one type of culture over another. So colorism is akin to white privilege. I see it that way, but other people may disagree. But colorism, my definition is, it is within, it's just the advantaging of lighter color, like phenotypical skin tone, over darker skin tone, right? Literally, like, the lighter you are, the lighter or the closer towards white you are, the more privilege or the more respect, I guess it's not the best word, but the more privilege you get and deserve. We see a lot of colorism in Latino communities and in African American communities, or communities where there's been some kind of miscegenation, right? Where we see, like, the intermarriage of people of different races or different ethnicities. Like, one great example is Black China and her skin whitening cream, right? So, you know, this idea of skin whitening, right? The idea of skin whitening creams, like, they're very popular in countries where, like countries like India, in South America, and in countries in Africa, right? So this idea of skin whitening is, that's a big red flag, right? As to how invasive this idea of colorism is. Like, literally, people are putting bleach on their skin, right, to lighten their face, right? The other way we see it is the preference of having straight hair as opposed to, like, curly hair, right? So, you know, that happens a lot in communities, here in the United States, in countries in Africa, in countries in South America, where people, you know, you straighten your hair, or you put in a weave, right? Or you get the blowout, the Brazilian blowout, right? There's a reason why it was invented in Brazil, right? And that's because of the colorism that happens there in Brazil. What else? I think there's people that, so, like, my hair is for the most part straight, and my skin is for the most part lighter, right? And so I'm a beneficiary of colorism, right? So, like, I don't have to worry about what my hair looks like. I can, like, literally show up looking like this, and people will be like, okay, well, you don't look too, you know, nobody will question what my hair looks like, right? Nobody really assumes that my hair is messed up, right? It's very easy for me just to walk out the door. I don't have to worry about, like, oh, is my hair straight? Does it look right? Is it too curly? Is it out of place? I don't have to worry about that, right? You know, and it happens in every culture. When I was little, my mom used to tell me, like, don't go in the sun so you don't get darker, right? And I wasn't the only one that was told to, right? Not because our parents are racist, right? But because they understand that there's a privilege that comes with having white skin and straight hair, right? I see now that there's kind of, in understanding and identifying that it's a thing, that like colorism is a thing, that we're actually seeing like wonderful movements away from, you know, privileging white skin and straight hair. And that's just kind of, and that's on the really shallow end, right? Colorism, like the color of your skin is associated with all kinds of like assumptions about your person, about your wealth, about your ability, about your intelligence, right? We haven't even gotten into that. I'm just talking about like the super shallow things, right? But there's a lot of other assumptions that people make based on your skin tone. When we talk about prejudice, right, which is like having, like literally like prejudging, right? That's what prejudice is, prejudging, right? And we talk about people that are not native born, I guess Americans is the example that we'll use, right? That actually has a really specific term. It's called xenophobia, right? Xenophobia is fear of a foreigner, and it comes from this idea, this larger idea of ethnocentrism. And it happens everywhere. The United States isn't the only place that has ethnocentrism. I think if you look at the Le Pen movement in France, in Australia, there's another movement, right? There's a lot of ethnocentrism that happens all around the world, right? And what ethnocentrism is it is privileging your own, right, culture, ethnicity over others. Okay? We all do this. If we do it here in Texas, we're like, oh, Texas is the best, Whataburger is awesome, In-N-Out sucks, right? We do that too, right? It's just that sometimes there's no institutional or structural weight behind that type of ethnocentrism, right? In the United States, it's a really particular type of ethnocentrism that's called nativism. Okay? And so nativism is it is disadvantaging people based on their lack of Americanness, right? This is identifying people that are obviously not American, or they don't adhere to American values, whatever that means to the person saying these things. Why is there prejudice around particular nationalities? Well, in the United States, it's because they don't have these American characteristics. Okay, so first and foremost, let me say that idea of people not being American enough has been pervasive in the United States since before the founding, right? So there's like Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter that he was worried about Germans coming to the colonies, or immediately following our independence. He was saying that there's all these Germans coming and they're going to Germanize us before we can Anglicanize them, and they can no more take over they can no more be English, then they can change their skin color to be white like ours. Something like that. This is a terrible paraphrase, but something like that, right? We have always, right, been prejudiced towards foreigners. Okay. Now, the worst things in us don't like foreigners, right? We're afraid, we're worried. But we've actually seen that immigrants really make this country great. And I'm just going to give you the most shallow example that I can think of, and that's the food, right? So we have, here in Denton, we have 2 ramen houses, which is amazing because that's my favorite food. We have pho, We have sushi. We have 7 different types of Mexican food from 7 different types of Mexican regions, right? We have deep dish pizza. You can go get like hamburger. All of these things, right, come from migrants, right? Either migrants that come from different parts of the country, right, or migrants that come from different countries. We are always afraid of things that we don't know, right? This idea of like fear of the unknown. Sometimes it applies to people, right? And that's okay to be, kind of a little worried if you don't know someone. But that shouldn't be the reason why, one, you don't talk to them or you don't interact with them. And it certainly shouldn't be the reason why you create some kind of animosity, right, or some kind of hatred with like a set of people. Because stereotyping people, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people students hate it when I stereotype them, right? When I'm like, oh, all of you students are just this way. They get so upset, right? And we can apply that to other cultural and ethnic groups.